a lullaby. Okay. You know that there's a very famous ISKCON lullaby, and we'll begin with that. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Famous ISKCON lullaby. And my own prayer, Om Jnani Timanasaya Jnani Jnani Atak Pakshumintam Ye Taishmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Okay, and okay, good. We have sharing set up. We consider ourselves part of the Sampradaya of Madhvacharya. And today, being his disappearance day, it's a good time to discuss some of the significance he has on us. Now, I do not claim to be an expert on Madhvacharya, and so what I decided to do, if it's okay with all of you, we're going to talk about him a little, and then I'm going to play a little clip from Radhanath Swami talking about Madhvacharya, because it's not an area that I've studied in great detail, but I know something about. Now, Madhvacharya is considered an incarnation of Vayu, the same Vayu that incarnated as Bhima, the same Vayu that incarnated as Hanuman. So certainly not an ordinary person. He was noted to be as an Indian philosopher, theologian, and the chief proponent of dualism. Dualism meaning that there's God and there's us, that there's two things, not one thing. Now, who is saying there was one thing? Of course, there was the Adi Sankacharya Advaita's philosophy, ultimately saying there's one thing. Nowadays, we call it the Mayavadis, saying there is only one thing. Now, this gets interesting because as the director of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, oh, just a reminder, anybody who's not in their underwear and is somewhat semi-decent, please put on your camera. I like to see the audience I'm talking to. I realize it's not possible for everyone, and those who can't put on their camera will try to embarrass you in some way. Okay, now that we've succeeded with that, and now I see my friends, I see my good friend Henry, and I see Adi's always in the temple room doing service. I appreciate that. And Adi, I know you know more about Madhvacharya than I do, so I expect you at the end to fill in what I leave out. You're good at that. So he was born around the year 1200. There's always debate when someone was actually born, but put in context, around the time of 1200. 1200 meant that India at that time had already had its Mughal conquest. There was Vaishnavism had become somewhat weak. We have had, certainly we had Adi Shankara putting forth the philosophy that it's all one, though at the very end he said, Bhaja Govinda, Bhaja Govinda, Bhaja Govinda, just worship Govinda. So he was considered an incarnation, Sankacharya, an incarnation of Shiva. At that time, in the name of the Vedas, like when the Buddha appeared, there were so many discrepancies. So he reestablished the philosophy, the authority of the Vedas, but he did it considering the Buddhism that was prominent and other prominent philosophies, he had to go in through the back door. So he reestablished it through a Advaita, non-dualist philosophy. It's all, as they say, it's all one. It's like that old joke. The Mayavadi walks into the pizzeria and he says, "I'll have one with everything," because that's how Mayavadis think. It's all one. Um, so then you have Madhvacharya coming in the 13th century, born in the Karnataka state, um, saying, no, it's not all one. There actually is a supreme, and there's us. We're not the same. And in the various Brahma Sutras, Madhava is identified as an avatar of Vayu, the son of Vishnu. I believe that's the wind god, I believe, if I'm getting that right. So Madhava's teachings are built on the premise there's a fundamental difference between the individual self and the Brahman. There are two unchanging realities, with the individual soul dependent on Brahman, never identical. So that was basically, he was dealing with the other influential schools at the time were the Advaita non-dualism and a qualified non-dualism. So Madhava asserted liberation is achievable only through the grace of God. So our own philosophy varies a little bit from that, as Lord Chaitanya has given it to us. Certainly, there's a grace of God, and there's the actions we do. They're both there. But at that point in time, as necessitated by history, Madhava asserted only through the grace of God. And his early life is quite interesting. He was originally named Vasudev. He was born in a Brahmin household. He became, as is typical of the name, he had many different names: Purna Prajna, Anandatirtha, Madhvacharya. When he became a sannyas, he was given the name Purna Prajna. That was just as a teenager. He renounced material life. And when he became head of his monastery, he was Anandatirtha. And later on, he was known as Madhva or Madhvacharya. He originally joined an Advaita monastery, which is what everyone had to do at the time. And even Lord Chaitanya, he would sit and listen to the Advaitas, listen and listen. Then after listening for days, when he was asked, "You have any questions?" Of course, he responded, "Well, I don't know. I didn't understand anything you said." Similarly with Madhva, he studied under the Advaitas, but was totally unconvinced by their philosophy. And he had frequent disagreements with his own guru, left the monastery, and began his own movement based on the dualism premises, asserting that human soul and God are two different things. Now, back in the 60s, I bought a Gita in Greenwich Village. I used to wander the village looking, well, as the song says, maybe looking for love in all the wrong places. But I'd wander the village hoping to find some higher knowledge. Two things happened to me in the village that greatly impacted my life. One is I went into a bookstore and I saw a copy of the Gita, the first time I bought a Gita by Franklin Edgerton's Gita. Has anybody here read Franklin Edgerton's Gita? It's more or less a decent translation with a rotten commentary. So I bought his Gita, and it had this beautiful kind of pinkish cover, and it smelled like incense. And it was on my shelf for a decade. And 10 years later, it still smelled like incense. It was almost a mystical book. And I read his Gita, And then I was in college and I had to write a paper on it for my class on Oriental philosophy. So I wrote a paper and I got an A on it. I knew what I wrote was absurd because I just repeated what he had said, but I knew there was an absurdity to it. What was the absurdity? The conclusion of Edgerton's Gita was Tat Twam Asi, thou art that, meaning you are God. Now, I thought if I'm God, the world got a real problem. I mean, we got a real problem. I knew I wasn't God, but I had a mimic, wrote my paper, got an A. I said, this is not the Gita I want, but it's the Gita I had. Then I ran into a Harinam party in Greenwich Village, led by Jayadvaita Brahmachari. And this party shocked me because in the village at that time, you saw all kinds of odd people. I mean, it was a real menagerie. It wasn't a yuppie place like now. It was much more of a hippie place. This was the West Village, East Village even more so. And I was in Washington Square Park and I saw the weirdest thing I'd seen. And you see, in those days, you saw a lot of weird things in the village. And what I saw was a Harinam party. And I looked at them. And and in the village that time, you have a lot of exhibitionists dressing up in odd clothes with odd tattoos and odd rings coming out of every place you wouldn't expect rings to be coming out of. And it was kind of like that. And I saw this party chanting. I said, my God, these are either the biggest exhibitionists in the whole village or they're above it all because no one would dress in a bed sheet with a green sock and a blue sock and clay marks. No one's going to dress like that unless they were the number one exhibitionist of all the exhibitionists in the village, or they were above it all. And they had this mantra they were chanting. And somebody went to try to sell me a magazine. But there was so many panhandlers in the village then. And I was so disgusted by these panhandlers because one lady, I saw her panhandle $1 off of me. Then I saw her later on in a mink coat taking the Uptown Express subway to the fancy part of Uptown Manhattan. I understood she was just panhandling for the fun of it. I said, I'll never give another dollar to anybody. And then this devotee tried to sell me a magazine, and I turned with a grimace on my face and said, no way. But I did, but the mantra wouldn't leave my head, just like a song wouldn't leave my head. And eventually I picked up the mantra and started chanting. So that's kind of my adventure in the village. And I'm just sharing this because it began with the Advaita point of view of the Gita. And that was very prevalent in that time I first came across the Gita. It was extremely prevalent after Adi Shankar in India at that time. And Madhvacharya fought against that. And he actually disassociated from his guru and began his own movement. He was also, I might point out, very tall and extremely strong. When he was a young boy, his parents had to go off, and his sister was to watch him. And he just wandered off and found a bull, grabbed onto its tail, and the bull went running through the forest. And the parents came home terrified. We lost our son. We lost our son. What's going to happen? Parents came home. The daughter didn't know where he was. And 12 hours later, he came back still holding on to the tail of the bull. Had taken a wonderful adventure through the forest and had a great time. So he's physically very strong, intellectually brilliant. And this is the Madhvacharya, who I'm going to give a quote here from the uh, Chaitanya. I'm going to give a quote of some of the 9 teachings he's had. So his teachings saying first, Bhagavan alone is a supreme truth without a second. He is the object of knowledge of all the Vedas. The universe is real. That's interesting. It's real. It's not an illusion. I am sitting here talking to you. I'm really here. The difference between God, soul, and matter are real. Ishwara, Jiva, and matter. Jiva souls are by nature, key teaching, the servant of the Supreme Lord Hari. There are 2 categories of jivas, liberated and illusioned. Those of us who are liberated, you may leave the class now. Okay, the rest of you are still staying. Okay, so illusion. So this is the purpose of class. We're working on that illusion. By the way, I stayed for class too because I'm in that category. 7th teaching, liberation means attaining the lotus feet of Bhagavan Krishna. In other words, entering into an eternal relationship of service to the Supreme Lord. Pure devotional service to Krishna is the only way to obtain his liberation. The truth may be known. This is a very important point. Later on, Rupa Goswami greatly expands upon this point. But listen carefully, please. The truth may be known by pratyaksha, direct perception, anuman, inference, and sabda, spiritual sound or Vedic authority. Last point. That last point is so important. At the Bhaktivedanta Institute, we recently published a book on this by Radhika Raman, the great devotee scholar. And we wanted, what do you do when your direct perception differs from what you read in Shastra? One of the areas we study at the BI a lot is the 5th canto. What do you do when what you're studying, when what you see seems to contradict what you read? How do you deal with that? That's a critical issue. And according to Rupa Goswami, and Madhvacharya, though sabda, spiritual sound or Vedic authority, is primary, if it disagrees with our direct perception or our inferences from it, then we need to work hard to resolve it. We do not ignore sense perception. He settled that. Because remember, he's appearing at a time when it was being taught that the whole world is illusion and you can ignore whatever your senses say. He said, no, you can't ignore it. There's a reality to that. The supreme reality is Shastra, but you must reconcile that. Of course, Rupa Goswami goes into much greater details of that. Now, there are Madhvacharya is said to have done various miracles. There's one story where his father was a very poor Brahmin, and a debt collector appeared outside his father's house. His father had bought a cow and owed the person money. And it wasn't like nowadays where when a debt collector appears, it takes you to court and sues you or calls you up 35 times a day, harassing you, mostly from call centers located in Calcutta, it turns out. It's not like that. In those days, the debtor showed up at the house and the debtor sat down and said, until you pay me, I'm going to sit here and not eat. Not the debtor, I mean the lender. The lender said, I will sit here and I won't eat until you pay me. And the society was so advanced that that was enough to kind of force payment of a debt. No such thing as going to court or calling the mafia to break your leg or, whatever we do nowadays. Rather, the debtor said, the lender said, I will stay here and fast until you pay me. And then Madhva said he took some tamarind seeds and gave it to the debtor, the lender, and next thing you know, they turned to gold coins and the debt was settled. So he did these miracles are reported in the literature. Um, and there's many stories like that. I won't go into more of them. He also wrote 37 texts are attributed to him called Bhashyas. One of the most famous is the Gita Bhasya on the Bhagavad Gita, a commentary. He wrote commentaries on the Rig Vedas, a review of the Mahabharata. He wrote many books. He also, in his uh, commentary on the Mahabharata, he made a very important comment that it is a wholesale corrupt text. Now, this is agreed to by the modern scholars. Many of us have read Mahabharata stories and wondered, how could people be so goofy? How could they sometimes act so stupid? Some of it's like that, especially the comic book versions. Turns out it's not correct. Many of these stories are not supported by the um, Srimad Bhagavatam. So Madhvacharya commented on that it's a very, except for the Bhishma Gita and the Bhagavad Gita, there's a lot of corruption. Right now, Hari Dayananraj is writing a new version of the Mahabharata. And when the stories disagree with the Bhagavatam, he rejects them. The Bhagavatam, of course, has a summary of it. He'll have to extrapolate and interpolate to fill it in. And that book just came out yesterday on Amazon, and it's called The Greater Bharata, which is a translation of Mahabharata. So any of you are interested in I've read it. It's the manuscript, fantastic version of Mahabharata, in agreement with what Madhvacharya said, that the scripture is corrupt, and therefore we must dig into the Bhagavatam to understand the essence of it. That book is available for you. I want to just get into a few of his philosophical points. I mentioned his epistemology. Now, what does epistemology mean? Can someone tell me? You can unmute and tell me.
The science of knowledge itself, or acquiring knowledge.
Yes, how you acquire knowledge. And he introduced an epistemology that accepted the three pramanas I mentioned: pratyaksha, meaning perception; anuman, meaning inference, that we infer something by reasoning. For example, if we observe smoke, we can infer there must be a fire somewheres. And finally, sabda, which means relying on testimony of experts, which is obviously Shastra and those who are talking from Shastra. So, and he introduced knowledge of an object as it is. I wonder if Prabhupada got his title, I don't know this, Bhagavad Gita as it is, from Madhva's introduced Kevala Pramana, which is knowledge of an object as it is. And just the essence of it. So the school holds Vishnu as God, who's also known as Hari, Krishna, Vasudev, Narayan, and it can only be known through the proper connection and pramanas of the Vedic teachings. What that means is he's saying that knowledge is intrinsically valid, and the knower and the known are independently real. So what it's saying is we can get knowledge. The world, again, going back to 19G, is not illusion. And by devotional practices, you can get knowledge, which is what Krishna says in the Gita. So these are some of the stories. I do have a clip to play of Radhanath Swami speaking, but I realize I've used up quite a bit of time. Let me stop here, see if there are any comments, questions. Anybody want to add something on this great? This is our Sampradaya head. Also, I might add, Madhvacharya respected all the other sampradayas, the other three major sampradayas, and said there's something useful to be gained from each of them. About a year or two ago, Krishna Abhishek, my great friend and devotee scholar, organized at Mayapur a celebration of Prabhupada's birthday with all four sampradayas showing up and speaking. It was quite an event to see them all praising Prabhupada, because the four sampradayas were all Vaishnavas. We don't have an argument with each other. It's like you walk into Baskin Robbins, somebody likes chocolate, somebody likes vanilla. That's the difference. But we have our sampradaya, which I like. Since my favorite is chocolate, I'll assume that's the flavor of our sampradaya. I'll just assume that for the moment. Bhima Prabhu.
Haribol Prabhu, I actually wanted other people to comment first so I could get a little bit of momentum here, see what
Well, we
what the
have
mood is.
our dear Adi is in the temple room, and he always adds something useful. So go for it.
What I have to say is useful. We say, "Oh, glories to Prabhupada," because I always pray, "Well, Prabhupada, what would you like us to say?" You know, I don't have anything on my own, and there are these schools of thought and that progression that you've explained very nicely. It's all one. No, it's not all one. It's two. You know, and what I heard from Srila Prabhupada and what convinced me is not only it's all one, it's not all one, it is one. He explained how we can understand this. And one of the things that impressed me, he said, if it's only all one, then there can't be any love. For love, it has to be a lover and a beloved. So we are united, but also, like you said, in the offering of service, there's someone giving and someone receiving. So this is just one example of how Prabhupada illustrated the different ways of looking at it. And didn't just declare this, declare that, but it was, he would refer to Shastra and he would explain to it, he is explaining it to us very nicely. And that really struck me, that with this monism, then how can there be love without two people? Anyway, this is one small contribution. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. I'm sure other people have something better to say.
Thank you. Bhima Prabhu.
Yeah, I just would like to second that. I heard a little saying today that I thought I'd always remember. Very simple. If it isn't love, it's a lesson. So basically, we've all had an inkling, a taste of love from hopefully from our mother and from our friends and maybe even a spouse. And so we get a little bit of a reflection. We see the pool of what love is, the giving, the unconditional attention, the cynosure of our desires is, the selfless giving, the caring first, placing somebody else as a priority over our own self. These are all aspects of love. And that's the simplicity of it all. It's all Krishna asked, really. Uh, you know, a leaf, a fruit, a flower, just with love. So I often find, being not an intellectual myself, that taxonomy, this categorization, these schools of thought, um, the elaboration, the books, the volumes of books, um, that they're all just pointing to the simple concept of which we have a reflection of in our everyday life at all times. And in any moment, even if we are alone, the love of self, a healthy love of self, that miracle that we are alive, that wondrous day when we wake up and understand that just being alive, just taking a breath in the morning, and these things are all simple to the simple. And I find taxonomy, which is this massive categorization, voluminous categorization of the ways that we're supposed to try to figure out who God is, is sort of like taxidermy. Taxonomy is like taxidermy. You have this stuffed animal, and it looks exactly like a fox, and the eyes are open, and it's in a fox-like position, a pose, but it's just stuffed. It's just a stuffed fox. It's not alive, and though it may have represented something real, it's not the reality itself. That the fox itself, while it was alive, is so much more a beautiful and so much more a reflection of God's creation than that fox that's stuffed. So I often find all this taxonomy, this voluminous philosophical discourse and argumentation that goes back and forth to be rather farcical. Could you elaborate on why I feel this way, Prabhu?
Um, Say that question another way. I'm just trying to follow what you're asking. Sorry.
Well, it's, Prabhupada said it's Krishna consciousness, and anything for that matter, is simple for the simple and complicated for the complicated. And there seems to be these philosophical wranglings and just book after book after book, when all we need is Sarvadharma Pravrititya, just abandon all these varieties of Dharma and just understand that, behold, the kingdom of heaven is within you. Behold, Krishna is within you. And if you simplify and shut the damn mind down, which also fills up with books and thoughts. Yeah.
I follow your question.
Okay.
Well, we say different slopes for different folks. If somebody just can be simply surrendered, that's great. If somebody's mind is more active, they may have to be convinced. I grew up kind of isolated in my youth due to a disability. So I spent many, many hours in the woods thinking, reading, what we would call now meditating when other kids were playing. It was just due to a quirk of fate that happened. So when I met Prabhupada, I had many, many questions to ask. Other people met Prabhupada and understood this is God's representative. I'm here and I'm fully surrendered. So one man's food's another man's poison. So somebody will surrender by asking many questions. Somebody will surrender by just, wow, this is it. So it's never one size fits all. And it's not to say that the way I did it is better than the way someone else did it. I admire people that just heard Prabhupada once and just surrendered. This is it. I know this is the truth. I was just talking yesterday with Hriday Namraj. He's here at the Bhaktivinoda Institute now, and saying he heard a student at Berkeley. It was kind of a seeker, but not a hippie. So kind of at Berkeley, not being a hippie didn't fit in great either. And at the International Center, Prabhupada came to speak, and that changed his life. He said, now somebody's saying the truth. So just one time hearing it changes. Other people may have to hear for a long time. So I hope that answers your question. Min, you have a question.
Thank you very much for class. I wanted to ask in regards to what you spoke. I believe you said that Radhika Raman Prabhu has written a paper on this, on the topic of what happens or what to do. What do we do when when our direct perception is different from what we hear in the text, and that what we're to do is to work hard to resolve it and don't ignore it. I'm wondering what that process of getting to the resolution might look like, and if that has something to do with the mechanism of pramana. And I'm wondering, really, my question, I think, more practical question is, when we have these conflicts, what is the best way to bring those up to our teachers without making offenses?
It's a question of great importance you've asked. It's very, very important. Easy way to do it. really easy. Follow the example of Arjuna. Arjuna asked Krishna many questions, and he challenged Krishna. Krishna, you said this, and now you said that. Which is it? Is it the impersonal path or the personal path? Which is it? Krishna, you're confusing me no end. I mean, that's how Arjuna was speaking to his guru, but politely. You begin with, "Oh, Guru Dev, I'm really confused." That takes a humility. And with that humility, then we can get knowledge. Because Krishna says, Raja Vidya, Raja Guhyam, this is the king of knowledge, but it's confidential. What does confidential mean? Confidential means it's not available to us without some humility. With that humility, we can get that knowledge. So it's very appropriate to ask these questions, but we ask in a humble state of mind. And if we do, Krishna arranges in our heart a lot of reciprocation. Now, there's a verse in the Gita, just approach a spiritual master, inquire submissively, render service, and the spiritual master, the self-realized soul, can then impart with you the truth. So that's the formula. You inquire submissively, but inquire. It's not just be submissive, it's inquire submissively. Prabhupada ended virtually every class with one phrase. Can someone repeat what that phrase was? What was the phrase Prabhupada ended virtually every class with?
Thank you very much.
No, not that.
Any questions?
Any questions? Any questions? He also said, thank you. That's true. But he said, any questions? So he wanted us to ask questions. He wanted us to even argue with him. For example, Shruti Kirti was one of Prabhupada's most loving secretaries, but he wouldn't argue with Prabhupada. So he said one day, Prabhupada said, Shruti Kirti, you're no fun. You won't argue with me. Because Prabhupada wanted questions and inquiry. And one of his favorite servants was Harikesh, who would argue all the time with him. They would just argue and argue. And Prabhupada loved it. And that's what Prabhupada wanted. He wanted us to, somebody, especially somebody with a good brain, to really be engaged that way. So does that answer your question, Min?
Yes, thank you very
You
much.
should ask many questions. And we'll go on. Jagannath Gopal.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, wonderful class on Madhvacharya. I personally was brought up in a family connected to Madhva Sampradaya, so that I
That's
relate.
very auspicious. That's very that's a better birth than mine. But go on.
So my question is, we often talk about this divine progression of sorts, where the Vedas were being misused for animal sacrifice. So Buddha came and he overthrew the Vedic authority. Then the Vedas had to be reestablished. Then Adi Shankaracharya came, and then Adi Shankaracharya preached monism, complete monism. And then to counter that, you have Ramanuja, and then you have Madhvacharya who came with
Correct.
dualism. And then we say that Mahaprabhu came to, kind of give the nuanced essence of it all, which is Achintya Veda Ved. So this progression, is it documented anywhere, or is it something that ISKCON devotees have kind of inferred from history?
Well, I like that question, but I'm not going to be able to give you a scholarly answer on that because that's outside of my field. So I would say we would have to refer to other historians of the tradition to give a precise answer. I have my own answer, but it may be too speculative. So I'd rather not push that point because I can't. I mean, there's many discussions in Prabhupada's purports on the sampradaya and how it's handed down and what the succession is. But I dare not comment more when others are better versed in that than I am. So that's the best I can do on that one. One question asked, which fine question, how does deity worship help in understanding how to use our senses service of Krishna? Well, it kind of leads into Jagannath Gopal's question too. Deity worship is very important for some of us and somewhat important to all of us. So somebody, by worshiping the deity, really gets great, great advancement. That's what they need. Other people, there's 9 process devotional service. Worship deity is one of them. Others may make their advancement by hearing, others by just cleaning the temple. So again, different slokas for different folks. So it's not that deity worship is, it's for all of us, deity worship is something that we give respect to and do, but it's not the main thing for most of us. So for some of us, the main thing takes them right back to Krishna. Myself, I'm not much of a pujari. I'm not very good at these things. I tend to be very clumsy, and it doesn't go well on the altar. And devotees tend to drop off at inopportune moments, things like that. So, but I still, when I see the deities, I worship just Sunday and Alachua, offering prayers, a relationship. When I first got back from India, I was brought up in a Jewish family, which, we're taught there'd be no graven image in front of us, one of the 10 commandments. Of course, what Moses was giving that instruction was they made a golden calf instead of worshiping God. It doesn't mean there's no image, but he was giving a time, place instruction. And I saw the deities and I was thinking, something inside me was, my training says you don't worship graven images, but the deities are so beautiful. So I asked one advanced lady, how do I approach the deities? She said to me, start with the feet. Just stand and chant in front of the Lord's feet. Gradually work your way up to the face. And when I did it, it was mystical. I understood the deity is a person. I had a relationship. I needed that. I needed to kind of whip out of me the impersonalism that was in me from my upbringing. So the deities helped a lot. Now, somebody else, that's full-time what they do. Somebody else, it's less. So again, different slokas for different folks. I hope that answers the question of Narottam. We have time for one more question. And if not, I put in, there's a beautiful lecture by Radhanath Swami on the early life of Sripad Madhvacharya. And I put that, since I had a clip I was going to play for 10 minutes, but I talked too much. So we didn't get there. So I put the link in the chat on this auspicious day. You can all listen to that. So with this, we'll stop here right on time at 8 o'clock. Thank you very much. And may you all think of the glories of our Sampradaya today. It's special. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Brahmatirtha Prabhu, for the wonderful Shastri class. Madhvacharya ki jai. We're fast until 12 noon today for that. Is that right?
It depends.
Yeah, different slogs for different folks.
Different slokas for different folks. Sometimes on fast days, Prabhupada would fast strictly, and sometimes say, today I'm fasting, I'll just have fruit. So it depends on your own individual needs. So, and your own individual health. People who are not healthy, I urge them not to fast unnecessarily. People who are healthy, it's a nice thing to do. So everyone has to make their own judgment of what works for them.
Thank you. Darshan time, turn on your cameras. Make sure your dhotis tighten up nicely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bhagavatam samasitam Seed of our spiritual master, by which we can obtain pure devotion and service. I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. May we wish to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is a perfection that fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him ecstatic prema emanates, and by him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, friend of the poor and the Lord and master of the devotees. O Master, be merciful unto us. Give us the shade of your lotus feet. May your fame be spread all over the three worlds. We take shelter at your lotus feet. Jai.
Jai Srila Prabhupada. Okay, welcome to the Afterglow. Would anyone like to speak? Bhima Prabhu spoke already. Bhima Prabhu, you look cool. You're either an exhibitionist or you're above it all. Yeah. Yes, yes. Right. Jagannath Gopal Prabhu, very nice question. Do you know in the Bhagavatam, where it names all the avatars, it talks about Buddha, it talks about Shankaracharya, I believe, and Lord Chaitanya. Maybe in that section of the Bhagavatam, it's implied, and all this progression is mentioned there.
Yeah,
We can look it up.
yeah. It's interesting because one person was arguing with me about the practical validity of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And this person said that, Prithu, so Christianity came later after, Vedas or whatever. So that's why it is more relevant and practical, which I don't disagree with, definitely. But then I was also thinking, if we apply that logic, then Gaudiya Vaishnavism came 500 years ago. It's the
There
most.
you go.
So, so Prithu, na matadligatinala. Yeah. So, but anyway, yeah, it's I love these topics about sampradayas, the historical aspect of how things came to be the way they are today. So
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. So you defeated the guy thoroughly? Did he sign the paper that he got defeated?
uh, I don't. So when people ask me pointed questions, I try to answer them in a very non-threatening way. But sometimes I do end up, confronting. But yeah, I try not to do that. So,
Thank you, Jagannath Gopal Prabhu. Yeah, you're a Vaishnava. We have our method of presenting our philosophy in such a way that the person benefits from it.
and
Hare
sometimes
Krishna.
argumentation may not be the answer. It's just you
Yeah.
give it to them.
Sometimes we just say, we love you. It's okay.
Yeah, yeah. It took some time for me to realize that. Otherwise, I would be like, no, I have to, bash this person. And but after, coming here, after seeing things around, I'm like, no, that is not the way. In most cases, that is not the way. So
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. Min has her hand up. Go ahead, Min.
I have a question for Jagannath Gopal Prabhu. Do you know if there was a catalyzing event for Madhvacharya where he was inspired to go off on his own and propound the concept of dualism? Was there like an event that happened, or?
So from what I know about his history, he actually had an Advaita guru. So this one. Okay. Okay. Alkut Nodni. So there was Allodu. So he had this Advaita guru who was okay. That's it. So he had this Advaita guru, and he initially started learning from him. But then there is an instance where this Advaita guru says something that really insults Krishna, that completely angers Madhvacharya. So he's like, that this is it. I'm not doing this anymore. And then it is said that he actually went to in his story, I forget the chronology, but at one point he went to Badrikashram, and he learned from Vyasdev directly, and then came back and propounded non-dualism. So that could be one one turning point in his life. And yeah, and then later on what happens is he comes back, and then he actually defeats the guru, and then his Advaita guru actually becomes his disciple. So there is a story something like that. I may be wrong with the details here, but yeah, he did do that. And it's interesting how fierce he was actually. He called Advaitins as, deceitful demons. So talk about confrontation, right? So he was very, very strong in his words, very, very strong in his purports to establish Vaishnavism. So yeah. But yeah, some many devotees say that was what was needed at that time, because Advaita was so prevalent. Advaita was so strongly ingrained in the spiritual fabric of India that it was needed that somebody as fierce as Madhvacharya needed to come and overthrow it. And then he sort of set the way for Mahaprabhu to come and give us Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Achintya Bheda Bhed. So I don't know if that answers your questions.
Great. Thank you so much.
Bhimacharya Prabhu is setting the way for Kalki Avatar to come. Years.
That's right, man. Somebody's got to clean up after that horse. Oh, can't hear.
You're muted, Prabhu.
I am
Hare
muted.
Krishna, I'm sorry. I was going to wrap it up, but Bhima Prabhu, you wanted to say something?
Well, I just wanted to say that everyone should be reminded of the fact that not to abandon common sense in regards to us being God. It's just like Brahmatirtha said. It's absurd. It's totally absurd. I remember I had a friend who took some psychedelic mushrooms way too much, and then during philosophy class, he stood up and he said, we are all, he was like, had lost it actually. And it was during a class, big class, like 150 people in it, Philosophy 101. And he got up and he said, we're God. We are God, you know? And people just laughed. And it's important to understand that that's the whole crux of our problem. What does it mean to be God? That means we are the center of attention, that things should go according to our plan, and that the will that is done, let it be our will be done. So this idea that we are God, as Prabhupada has said, is the last trap of Maya. But any common sense, any little kid, if you went to a little kid playing, you know, in the fields and said, "Oh, you're God," you know, "You're God," they would just laugh. And yet we have whole sampradayas that are centered around Tvam Tat Asi. You know, you are that. I probably just mangled that Sanskrit there. But don't abandon your common sense. It's all so very, very simple. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Bhima Kaviraj Prabhu. All right. Happy Madhvacharya Disappearance Day. Dear devotees, thank you for your association. Happy Snow Day. We love you. We need you. Hare Krishna. Be kind to your spouse. My wife is looking at me and she's doing some cooking and some dishwashing. And she's like, yeah, share more realizations. Share more. What other realizations do you have? Tell them. Meanwhile, I'm cleaning. So I have to go. Dear devotees. That's the purport.
God has to go cleaning.
Yeah.
God is taking out the trash.